tell me now. You've mentioned Kubernetes a few times.
Mhm.
I think everybody who would watch an interview with a programmer about their career would probably have some. Actually, no. Why don't you tell me what Kubernetes is?
Okay, so Kubernetes is a solution for when you want to manage many jobs across many servers.
Yeah.
And so if you have a couple, actual servers yourself, or even if you have servers on the cloud and
Yeah.
you want to run, specific jobs or applications on those servers, Kubernetes is basically a layer that allows you to abstract a lot of the basically individual work around that.
Right.
It might almost be easier to think about, Docker and containerization first.
Right.
And so to quickly touch on, what that is, the idea behind a Docker container basically is that, in the old days of, 15 years ago, if you want to run an application online, if you want to have a server somewhere, somebody's going to, set that server up, whether it's by SSHing into it or, whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, okay, I need Python on this computer, download Python. I need these drivers, download those drivers. I need whatever other kind of configuration on that server, download those things. Maybe it's like FFmpeg to do some kind of image processing. And then you start your application, it does server things, people connect to it, all as well. And maybe a year later, you have to make some kind of modification. You need a new library, there's a security update, you SSH onto the computer again, you make those changes,
Right.
all as well, it keeps running. And then maybe you have a new server that you want to launch because you're scaling up now.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, what is everything we've ever installed on the first server so we can replicate that on the second server?
Yeah.
Maybe you do an okay job at getting the exact same environment. It's good enough. It still works. A couple more years go past. You add 3, 4, 5 more servers. Maybe you can't find that library that you downloaded years ago. You're like,
Right.
Well, this older version or this newer version is probably exactly the same.
Probably close
APIs probably
Yeah.
line up. So let's launch those as well. And so that's state of the world 15 years ago.
That's, I think, one of the best. Well, yeah, I mean, the best cases in favor of Docker that I have ever had laid out for me, because it just so clearly and concisely describes the pain of server management in the old style. And so, like, enter Docker, right? This is where we are, that we've got. Yeah.
So enter Docker and the idea of containerization. The idea of containerization and Docker is you're going to still describe what you're doing in that server. You're still going to write pip install ffmpeg if you need an image processing library, but you're going to describe all those things that you do to set up that server in a single Docker file.
Yeah.
That Docker file is going to basically start with some kind of base image that maybe represents just a clean Ubuntu operating system, let's say. You add the things that you want, all the commands that you're going to run inside that Docker file, setting up things like permissions, user groups, anything along those lines as well. And in the end, you get an image at the other side that has that exact same configuration. And now if you want to run that exact same configuration on 10 servers, you can just run that Docker image and you notice exactly the same.
That's right.
If you do need an update to some library, you add it to your Docker file, you create a new image, you update all those images on the old servers, you have a guarantee that basically all your servers are exactly the same in terms of the software configuration, at least.
Right. And because the storage of the files is separate to the actual machine itself, you can actually replace that Docker image and point to the same folder, and all of a sudden you've just updated the entire server without risking any of your valuable data. And so that's a really
So you have ideas about volumes is what you're referencing there now.
Yeah.
Which allows you to basically say what is like my server level concern in terms of setup, and then what's my application level concern or my data level concern.
Yeah.
You can kind of separate those in different ways that allow for some cleverness and get you basically just the guarantees that you want in software.
Right. Yeah.
And so Kubernetes is basically a program that allows you to kind of take those containers and describe, okay, I want 3 copies of my application or 10 copies or 50 copies or replicas, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
And manage basically running those against your entire kind of server environment.
Right.
If you have 50 servers and you want to run, these 20 images on, 20 of those servers, Kubernetes figures out provisioning and handling, make sure that, it's running on the correct number of servers, make sure if a server fails, the new one is, started up normally or naturally without you having to do anything.
Yeah.
So it kind of dramatically eases the DevOps process.
Yeah.
Obviously,
my understanding or the way I've seen it described is like Kubernetes, like Windows or Linux is an operating system for one computer, whereas Kubernetes is an operating system for N computers, right?
Mhm.
And so that's my understanding of it. Sorry, you were about to keep going on something in that space.
I'd say basically, because at risk fuel again, we have let's say 80 computers, servers, and 2,000 CPUs across all of that. Kubernetes basically allows us to say things like allocate each of these containers exactly one CPU, and up to 8 gigabytes of RAM, and start this same basically application 1,500 times or 1,700 times.
Yeah.
Or start at 100 times, but scale up if CPU utilization is above 75%, let's say, using this auto scaling algorithm. And so when we want to manage all these things that we're running across that entire server set, Kubernetes makes it completely trivial.
Right.
I want to say completely trivial. Maybe that's a lie. There's a learning curve to it.
I've been sitting in this same interview as you. Nothing I have heard today is trivial, except maybe that PGA shit we were talking about earlier. So in terms of Kubernetes, was that already chosen when you came on board, or did you examine anything like Mesosphere or any of the other Docker Orchestrate? Have you done a comparison and contrast against the different, and why Kubernetes, if you have an answer?
It was already in place when I got there, which was, the big reason for me, at least.
Yeah.
I think one of the unique problems that I think Kubernetes is probably better at compared to those, although I haven't deeply kind of investigated it, is basically, so standard Kubernetes practice. You'll hear, DevOps people say things like, cattle, not pets, which is the idea that basically treat each of your servers as if it's like a random thing without an identity. And it can just kind of run anything. And we kind of break that convention a little, especially on the GPU side.
Okay.
So, we have a couple of computers with, our fancy GPUs that cost way too much money.
Yeah.
And, we use those specifically for training. We have a couple of computers as well. They're set aside specifically for storage, which are very strategically located next to the training computers. So that as we're saving, terabytes of data, whenever we want to move that terabyte of data to our training computer, that takes, minutes instead of hours.
Right.
But otherwise, and Kubernetes basically allows you to label all those, individual servers. So I can say, only run this job on a GPU computer.
Oh,
only run this on a storage computer. Run this on any of our kind of, data gen computers.
Yeah. And we don't know that Mesosphere and Docker Orchestrate or any of the other solutions can't do that, but we know that Kubernetes does do that. And so it's a really strong case for you to stick with the thing that you know that you need and you know how to do. Okay.
Yeah.